we would like to welcome Gabriella Hannah. She is the program manager for the Alzheimer's Association Greater Missouri chapter. She manages the care and support groups, develops community partnerships, and training volunteers within 38 counties. For 2 years, she had the opportunity to learn more about Alzheimer's disease and its impact through her role at the association. Everybody, welcome Gabriella.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Good. Well, thanks Jen and Beth for having me here today. As she already mentioned, I'm Gabriella Hannah, Program Manager for the Greater Missouri chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So today we're going to talk about effective communication strategies. And essentially this is geared towards the caregivers and how to effectively communicate to your loved one who is on this horrific journey of Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia. So what are we going to learn today? Are we good? Can you hear me? We're good? Okay, because I am kind of soft-spoken. So today we will explore how communication takes place when someone is living with any form of dementia. By the end of today's program, you will be able to not only explain the communication changes that take place throughout the course of the disease, but you'll also be able to decode the verbal and behavioral changes delivered by someone living with dementia and respond in ways that are helpful to that person. In addition, you will be able to identify changes to connect and communicate at each stage of that disease. So, you would think this is an easy question to answer, but let's break down what is communication. So it's all of these things. You have to connect with others, conversation, you self-express. Body language is a key part of communication that sends those messages, those unspoken messages. Making decision, words, especially facial expressions, that tells it all, right? You know, some people who are not as outspoken, you can kind of tell from their body language and their facial expressions what's really going on in their mind. And so, as the brain changes with Alzheimer's disease or other dementia, people lose the ability to speak and decode language in usual ways. The better we understand these changes, the better we can connect with people living with Alzheimer's or any other dementia throughout the course of the disease. And so we're going to go through how communication changes throughout the various stages of Alzheimer's and other dementia. And so as Alzheimer's disease progresses, people will lose their ability to communicate their thoughts and feelings through words. So they also lose the ability to understand the words that others speak to them. However, they do maintain a sense of self throughout the stages of the disease. So this means that the elements of those characteristics that makes the person unique will remain a part of him or her throughout the disease. Connecting with the person's self is key to effective communication, staying connected and giving him or her a voice as the disease progresses. And that's a key point that I'm going to make throughout this whole presentation. Please keep in mind that this person is not losing their sense of self. They are still that person. You're just helping navigate in their new reality. So, in the early stage of the disease, there may be a few noticeable changes in the person's ability to communicate with words, or there may be no recognizable changes at all. Asking the person how he or she would like to be helped with words can be useful in that stage. And so language abilities diminish as this disease progresses, right? And as communication moves from easy conversation to relying on emotions and the 5 senses to connect. And as care partners and caregivers, you are the ones who will adjust the ways you communicate and maintain with those connections with them throughout this disease. And so remember that the essence of the person continues. And like I said earlier, respect and adjust your communication based on what is meaningful to the person in that moment, as of today, no matter what the stage is. So, as we move forward and dig deeper into the communication into the early stages, here's some of the changes you may notice. Difficulty finding the right words, taking longer to speak or respond. They're starting to withdraw from conversations, and then they're struggling with decision making or problem solving. And so whether you notice changes in the way the person speaks or not, communication in that early stage is very crucial. This is a period in which everyone involved is adjusting to the diagnosis and having thoughts and feelings about the changes ahead of them. And so remember that denial is part of the disease for most, while for others, emotions can just be simply very overwhelming. And so come to terms with diagnosis and the emotions you are feeling by talking it through together and expressing that connection through body language and your facial expressions that we talked about. This will help you both accept the diagnosis moving forward and then discover new ways to live positive, fulfilling lives together. And so communicating throughout this process can also bring closeness that will help everyone adjust a little bit more easily as the disease continues to go on. And so now, we're going to...
Communicating in the early...
Ooh, that's so loud. Okay, so now we're going to hear from a caregiver, and she's actually from the Alzheimer's Association Home Office. This is Martha Tierney, and she's going to tell us how to be helpful in that early stage of the disease.
Communicating in the early stages of dementia with the person with the disease is important. At that time, you still have language as a tool, so you can learn things about what they might prefer as the disease progresses. For example, as the disease progresses, a person might have difficulty finding words. Caregivers often struggle to know what to do in that moment. Early on in the disease, you can ask. You can say, if you ever have trouble coming up with a word, would you rather that I jump in and give you the word, or do you want me to wait and allow you some time so you can find it on your own?
And so here are some ways that you can really connect with someone in the early stages of the disease. So, ask directly how to help with communication. Keep sentences direct and straightforward to help the person avoid feeling lost in the conversation. Short sentences can make your meaning more clear. Avoid long explanations and take your cue from the person, taking care not to talk down to him or her. So you don't want to make it seem that you're talking to them in a childlike manner. I know that kind of naturally happens when you're trying to get someone to understand you, but you want to make sure that you are talking to them as if they're an adult, right, and that they're your equal, although they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. And also keep in mind that it may take the person longer to find words or put their thoughts together and express them. So be sure to allow that extra time for conversations so no one feels pressured or rushed. Keep in mind that conversational needs will change over time, and in the early stage, the person with dementia needs to have his or her voice heard. There we go, that's a tongue twister. You can help facilitate this when you meet the person right where he or she is today, regardless of the stage of the disease. So why do I keep saying make sure their voice is heard? That's because in the early stage, they still have that sense of self. So we want to make sure that we're really keeping in mind their true wishes as the disease progresses, right? So this is the crucial time to have those tough conversations that you kind of don't want to have, but it's important because, again, the early stages is the key stage where they're actually able to still be somewhat coherent and competent and make those right decisions for themselves. Also, be sure to include the person in any conversation if he or she wishes, especially those that will have an effect on his or her future. All right, so what do you need to keep in mind as you're communicating with someone in the early stage? Don't make any assumptions about a person's ability to communicate because of an Alzheimer's diagnosis. The disease affects each person differently. So again, What the early stage looks like for one person will differentiate from another. But just make sure that you communicate effectively by asking, how can I help you through this conversation? Or what do you need from me? What would you like? Asking questions is definitely key in communicating effectively with a person who has a diagnosis of dementia. In addition, speak directly to that person. If you want to know how he or she is doing, also explore which method of communication is most comfortable for that individual. This can include letters, email, phone calls, or in-person conversations. Not sure how many people are doing letters, but the others, email, phone calls, or in person. Some people are more comfortable with that screen time, right? Some people express better when they're behind the screen versus if they're in front of an individual. And then, of course, it's okay to laugh. Sometimes humor kind of lightens up the mood and makes conversation and communication easier. And then always be honest and frank about your feelings. Don't pull away. Just know that your friendship and the support are very important to that person. They need you. So jumping into the middle stages and how communication will change once they progress in the middle stages. So many changes in the middle stage of Alzheimer's or any other dementia affect communication. If you notice some of these changes in the early stage, they are likely to become like more pronounced in the middle stage. So some of the changes you may notice are listed right here. Increased difficulty finding the words, using familiar words repeatedly, inventing new words to describe very familiar things, easily losing train of thought, speaking less often, and then lastly, communicating through behavior rather than words. So to go back to one of these changes that's listed on here, inventing new words to describe familiar things. So I came across a volunteer whose mother was diagnosed with dementia, and she said she realized that something was wrong was because her and her mother were taking a trip, a road trip, and her mother pointed out some umbrellas. And her daughter, our volunteer, she was like, I didn't see the umbrellas, what are you talking about? So she just thought, like, you know, she's focused on the road, maybe she missed it on the side, right? And then her mother goes, no, they're right there. And she was pointing at the mountains. So that is kind of more of an extreme example, but just to kind of give you an insight onto what it means by inventing new words or describing things without using the actual words. So she's using umbrellas to describe mountains, right? Very simple objects, but she's switching up the two. Or, you know, unable to say that you're sitting in a chair, but you're describing something that you sit in and has 4 legs, besides just saying you're sitting in a chair, right? So those could be some things that you want to notice in conversing with someone. Some others may include difficulty organizing words logically, reverting to speaking in a native language, using curse words a lot, and then relying on gestures instead of speaking. So in this stage, they get a little frazzled. So, you know, I'm talking with my hands right now, but if I'm doing all of this and nothing's coming out, that might be considered a change in communication within the middle stage. And so now we are going to view a video of Beverly. She shares advice that she gives to caregivers as a support group facilitator.
I would advise couples, and I usually do advise the caregiver who comes to the group and is caring for a spouse, that you take your time. Always count to 3 before you respond. because it gives you time to think about your answer and what's going on. Generally, in a marital dispute, it's quick. It's just back and forth. You're quick to give an answer. When they've been diagnosed, to sit back and say, okay, you're supposed to be the one that's reasonable here. Let's change how we do this, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's you. You cannot control them and their process.
You cannot expect the person living with the disease to behave as he or she might have done in the past. At least you can't expect them to give a reasonable response at this point in time. And then if a communication of yours isn't getting the desired response that you were hoping for, focus on what you can change and what you are doing, you yourself, to alter the situation. And so now we're gonna go into how to connect and approach that person gently in the middle stage. So when communicating with a person in the middle stages, it's important to approach them a little bit more gently, because now they are getting into that agitated, slightly aggressive stage. So identify yourself and approach the person from the front and at eye level. Call the person by name and say who you are in relation to that person. Hi, I'm Gabby, I'm your daughter. Hi, I'm Gabby, I'm your sister, right? This will help orient that person and get his or her attention as well. And then sometimes just using a slight touch can show that you care, that you're not there to harm them, even when your words are just about a task or are just not understood. And so a gentle touch can also just help the person, get their attention too. And then also avoid criticizing, correcting, and arguing. It will backfire most of the time. Pay attention to your facial expressions and tone of voice as well. Try to be calm and patient. The person can feel either your tension or your patient understanding. So just be cognizant of that. And then, if you haven't noticed, this is the trend throughout the presentation, take your time. Take your time. You have to be patient when communicating with someone who has dementia, and give yourself and the person you're talking with enough time to respond, interact, and connect. The Alzheimer's Association loves videos. So the next one will be about Rebecca, and she talks about adjusting her own thoughts and responses when her mother ends up repeating herself.
She could sense my frustration, because occasionally I would lose my patience and I would bark at her. Why are you asking me that question again? I just answered that question 2 minutes ago. And then she would get frustrated because, she was very old school, and she's like, don't disrespect me, and I didn't ask you that question 2 minutes ago, it's a new question. So phase 2 of our relationship was like, okay, that's a new question, I'll answer it again.
So yeah, the common communication that's often noticed in individuals who has an Alzheimer's diagnosis is the repetitiveness, repeating themselves. And so that can be kind of annoying, right? But again, you have to remember, they don't remember what they just said. So you need to be patient, take a step back before you respond, and you need to remember that they don't remember. So you need to make sure that your response is not in a tone that's a tone of annoyance, right? Because they can sense that. And so, again, with Rebecca, she was trying to convince her mom that she hadn't said that already, or that she did say that already. And so rather than trying to convince the person of what you remember happening, it helps to accept that the person does not remember it as you do. Accept his or her perspective and respond from that point. So instead of being combative, just pretend like you heard it for the first time, right? Or the second time, or the third time. Just be like, oh, I had no idea, even though that person said it 30 minutes ago. So, within the middle stage, it's really important to connect and join the persons in their reality. Keep respect and empathy in your mind. You take a little time to see the world as he or she may see it right at that moment. When seen from his or her perspective, the person's behavior can often become understandable to you. Due to the changes to the brain that accompany the disease, the person will probably not be able to see your perspective, so you will have to adjust and adapt to theirs. And so joining the person's reality is key, helping the person have his or her say, and it provides soothing and reassurance to them too. So to do this, you can take these steps on this slide. You will listen to figure out what the person wants or needs. This means paying attention to both the words and the behavior of that person. Keep in mind that the person may be saying something about his or her feelings or needs, but may be feeling something else on a deeper level that also needs some attention from you. For example, the words, "I can still drive just fine," may also contain the feeling, "I don't want to give up my independence, so don't take that from me." The words, "Stop taking over my life, I hate it," may actually reflect the meaning, "I hate this disease and I don't understand why I can't do what I always could." So it's kind of weird to think that someone in the middle stages of the disease kind of acts like a teenager, right? So I think we can all handle teenagers. I think we can handle people in the middle stages of the disease, right? And so let the person know you understand what he or she may be feeling and why, whether they are expressing through words, behavior, or both. Answer any questions and address any issue he or she may bring up. And then again, be concise, brief, and straight to the point. You don't want to mix in too many details in that conversation or too many directives that you would like them to do. Give it to them very short and to the point. And then most importantly, respond to the emotions behind the statement. For example, if the person is communicating with words, you might say, "You seem sad. Do you feel sad?" And then just wait for a response. If the person says yes, you may want to guess the cause, as in, do you miss the way things used to be? If the person says yes to this as well, you could add, so do I. If the person is communicating with behavior, see if you can identify and speak about the emotion behind the behavior. If the person is rummaging through possessions, it may be a way of communicating boredom or they're needing something. Hitting during bathing can be a way of saying that the person feels too hot or too cold or uncomfortable with being naked around you, or just feel like they're out of control. And then finally, only after you've responded to the emotions, reassure and redirect the person by encouraging him or her to do something that may shift the thinking and behavior. So to continue the example, you could say, "I'm glad to be here with you today. Let's go take a walk outside." In this way, you're gradually moving the person from feeling sad to doing something that can bring them up and positive in their spirits. So, in order to connect as well, you'll want to keep it slow and basic. I've mentioned this before. Use those short sentences and basic words. Speak slowly and clearly, one person, and then one question at a time. So it's important to just not have too many people in that conversation, because they might feel that they're losing that intelligence if you guys are talking so fluently and that nature. So if you just keep it on a one-on-one basis, that would be nice for them to understand and feel like they're keeping up with the conversation. Also limit any distractions. Again, be patient. And then offer a guess or fill-in words if acceptable. So if it's taking them a little bit longer to respond, you could say, you can just interject and finish the sentence for them if that's something that they're okay with having you do. And then also, Give multiple cues. Provide visual cues and gestures. Avoid sudden movements. Write things down for the person. Put answers into your questions. Also repeat as needed. Turn negatives into positives. And avoid quizzing. So with the avoid quizzing the person, asking him or her to try harder to remember, or saying that he or she knows the answer and asking the person to think again is kind of unfair, and it really doesn't work. So trying harder just leads to more frustration. It is much more respectful and helpful to give the person the information he or she needs for a task or situation, along with reminders as needed. So I'm gonna go a little backwards now, so going up the ladder of the list. So turn negatives into positives. So for example, if you need to get the person into the shower and they already resist the task, rather than saying it's time for you to shower, that could trigger resistance. You can say, let's go get cleaned up for the day so you can be ready for Susie's visit. Repeat as needed. So although you may have many reminders in place for that person, need to repeat information you provide or questions you ask, the person may not have been able to decode that message completely the very first time, so repetition can help. And then you'll also want to write things down for the person. So reminder notes, calendars, labels, lists can remind that person of where things are, where things belong, what is needed to be done, and then also, most importantly, is who to that person. Labeled photos can help the person keep track of names and relationships in the middle stage. And so, going up to the first point, provide visual cues and gestures. So use gentle gestures and pointing, but avoid making sudden gestures that may startle the person. So, all right. So, to connect, respond empathically and reassure that person. So again, join the person's reality. So let the person know that you are there, you're listening, and that you hear his or her concerns. Next, provide reassurance that you hear and you understand, that you guys are there together, safe, and that you are there to help. You're not there to harm. And then next, let the person know that you hear and understand the thoughts and feelings that he or she is experiencing. As long as there is not a safety issue, agreeing to go with the flow, finding common ground whenever possible, and then make any adjustments to the situation that are necessary, and then direct the person to another activity if needed. And so, if you are on this journey as a caregiver, you probably have told a couple white lies here and there, right? To avoid any unwanted aggression or agitation from the person who has dementia. And that's exactly what we're saying here in the middle stage. As long as the person is not, or as long as the person is not in harm's way by you going with the flow or creating that small white lie, sometimes that's needed to avoid a bigger unnecessary altercation, right? So now we're jumping into the later stages of the disease and how we can communicate effectively then. So here's some changes you may notice. Communication is now reduced to a few words or sounds. So in the late stages, the person may only use quite few words, but he or she still needs to connect and communicate. So since the person has lost many functions by the late stage, you may feel a strong urge to just do something. So usually your presence and connection with the person are much more important than doing something specific for that person. And so remember again that that individual is an adult with a sense of self that continues throughout the stages. And you can connect with those aspects of the self by remembering the person's history and respecting his or her preferences that they expressed in the earlier stages. The goal is to keep the person to feel content and happy whenever possible. And then also just keep talking. Use familiar words, names, phrases, poems, messages, passages or songs. Whether you get direct response from the person or not, the sound of your voice helps maintain the connection between you. And then also, using those 5 senses will really help to communicate in this later stages of the disease. So the touch, sight, sound, smell, taste, those will be the keys to connecting with someone in the later stages and will help you better understand those person's feelings and thoughts during this phase. And so now we got another great video from Sandra about connecting with her mother in the late stages of the disease.
I know that my mom feels aggravated. I know that she feels alone. I know that she feels confused. And I know on any given day, I don't know if I've made it better for her. I try. In these later stages, I've come to recognize that being really aware of the 5 senses is really important. Touch seems to give her a great deal of comfort. I know when I come over, I'm going to brush her hair all the time. My husband noted to me recently, he said, you know, you should see the look on your mom's face when you're brushing her hair. She's just happy. She's just happy. She doesn't say a lot. And I do it for a long period of time. I comb it, I braid it, I do funny things with it, but it just allows me to just be with her in a way that makes her feel comfortable.
And so when you connect through touch, it also helps you to understand the person's feelings in this particular stage. Connecting through the 5 senses can be a way to connect, and this feels more comfortable to the person because they're no longer able to express with words like they once could. So here's some ideas. Feel different fabrics. So if that person was really into fashion or they did sewing, they would probably really appreciate you bringing in some different textures and looking at that and touching those things. Identify shapes by touch. Give hand lotion massages. Identify everyday items in a bag by touch. Visit some animals. So if they're a huge animal lover, why not go play with some goats or some chickens or some puppies, right? Sculpt using non-toxic materials. So if they were a really artsy person, bring out some paint and do some some finger painting, do some clay projects. Also, you can just hold the person's hand or stroke his or her arm or back. It's just that comforting feeling. And it's a powerful way to connect non-verbally. Connecting through sight. So you could potentially laminate brightly colored pictures to look at together. Watch videos of animals, nature, or travel. I prefer anything on Netflix, but that's just me. Look at photos, albums together. That's a great one because that triggers all that history prior to the diagnosis and the disease progressing. Talk about their younger days, right? View photos of famous paintings, favorite settings of prominent people from the past. Go bird watching or visit an aquarium. You can also paint with watercolors. That's a huge thing. I see a lot of people in the dementia community doing that. And then also, of course, go outdoors or sit by an open window together. And so over there on the table, I actually have a flyer of a program that the Alzheimer's Association and the Missouri Botanical Garden have partnered to do. And so it kind of falls in this list where we are partnering with them to do memory walk tours. And so you're hitting kind of all the touch points. You're going outside. You're also learning a little bit about the history and the foliage, the plants and the flowers. But a lot of the attendees remember it as Shaw Park, not Mobat, right? So that brings up a lot of memories as well. And then it's a good way to get that fresh air and be with people who care for you, but are also on this journey as well. So definitely check that out. And so we can also connect through sound. So listen to familiar music. Right across the street at Maryville University, we have a partnership with them and we do music therapy classes. So each week they do a genre of music from 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they just have a grand old time. Listen to recordings of the sounds of nature, farms, cities, or animals, kind of take them back to their home, right? Identify musical instruments by sound. Listen to songs or speech in the person's native language. So if English is not their first language, and they're an immigrant, maybe they would really appreciate listening to music from their culture, or things that they used to do when they were younger. Read books, poetry, scripture, or newspaper articles to the person. And then lastly, let the person hear the gentle tone of your voice too. So even though they probably can't communicate too well back, they still want to hear you out. Their hearing is still there. Another way is connecting through smell. And so the sense of smell is one of our most basic senses. Although this sense may diminish with age and as the disease progresses, consider using some of the ideas on this slide to connect with the person. So you can make small plastic bags containing items for the person to smell, such as herbs or spices, like if they're really into cooking and they no longer have the ability to do that. Like my granny loves cooking greens and ham hocks, so that would probably be something I would try to put in a bag, I don't know. And then you could do cotton balls dipped in essential oils. They're really into stuff like that. You could do grass clippings or fragrant flowers, teas or coffee beans. Use fragrant lotions for hand massages. And then also cook or feed the person's foods that smell good, such as apple pie or chicken soup. Or cook their favorite food, and that kind of brings up those memories too. Okay, now this is for sure the end. Any questions? Yes.
Does dementia always progress into Alzheimer's, and what is the big difference?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
Does dementia always progress into Alzheimer's?
Gotcha.
And what is the big difference?
Yeah, so dementia is like the umbrella term.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I can. So he said, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, and then does dementia progress into Alzheimer's? Is that correct? Yes, okay. So dementia essentially is an umbrella term, and then there's different types, forms of dementia. So Alzheimer's is the greatest, or the most common form of dementia, so that's why we use those terms interchangeably. But Alzheimer's falls under that umbrella, and then there's vascular dementia, there's frontotemporal, Parkinson's and Huntington's disease falls in there as well. And so that dementia does not progress into Alzheimer's, right? It would be mild cognitive impairment, essentially, that could potentially progress to Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia that I mentioned. Yes?
In the early stages, is there anything medically that can be done to defer the progression of dementia?
So we have came out with 3 medications. Aduhelm, donanemab, and Leqembi was the last one to be, it's either in FDA approval or it's already been approved, I can't remember. But it's on the market. It's real hard to get. So the 3 prescriptions that I just mentioned, they are the breakthrough meds because they are actually attacking or slowing the progression of the amyloid plaque that's building up on the brain that this disease causes. So, unfortunately, if you don't catch it early enough, it's not going to be effective. It's not going to benefit you if you're in the early, middle, late stages, right? But if you catch it early enough, just like with cancer, right? You're trained.
She said, what's early enough?
Yeah, what's early enough? Don't have a definitive answer. There's not a definitive answer. So you want to get it. The best would be in that mild cognitive impairment stage. So it's a mild memory loss to where it hasn't fully progressed to an early stage. It's a very small window. And so that's why early diagnosis is very important, because these 3 medications that I just mentioned only work in that very small window. But it's hard to determine if someone is in that MCI phase, because most of the time we misinterpret it as just regular forgetfulness, right? Yes.
How do you determine if you have dementia? I mean, is there a test for dementia? How do you determine if you have it, or whether they call it, you know, when I can't remember a name from someone I can't remember, but they say, oh, that's just age. Well, is it just age, or is it the start of a dementia?
Yeah. So with how to determine if you have some sort of dementia, your primary physician will do some sort of memory screening. So that usually entails you telling time on the clock, repeating,
Say that again.
telling time on a clock, repeating 3 or 5 things after him. There's one more activity that they do, but a lot of the time they kind of embed it in a conversation. I haven't seen this consultation live before, but I've been told that a lot of physicians kind of embed it when they're asking you questions. And so that will trigger them to diagnose you. And then what was your second part of your question?
Well, I asked, how do you determine what kind of test, and what's the difference? I think someone else just asked that. When I can't remember somebody's name that I saw last week, I know the person. Is that age, or how do you determine the difference?
So age is a risk. Yeah, age is a risk factor. Family history is a risk factor. Genetics is a risk factor. So they're not going to determine whether you get it or not. You're just at higher risk after the age of 65. Now, to your questions with tests, of course, there's in the news that there's this blood test that
Is there a blood test now?
it's still in the works. I cannot confirm or deny. I'm just in the same boat as you guys with that information. And so the tests that I am aware of are essentially screenings that I mentioned, the clock and the repeating the different words. Yes.
What's a normal time of progression if you're in?
What's a normal time of progression from first stage to third?
I know you're gonna hate this answer, but it ranges by the person. Because
But give us a range. Say something.
it can last as long as from 5 years to 20 years. So like Lewy bodies would be the most aggressive form of dementia, 5 to 10 years, unfortunately. But with Alzheimer's, you could last with the disease and live with it for as long as to 20 to 25 years.
That's pretty good.
It is good. But how long are you in each phase? Depends on the person, right? You could be in the early stage for 2 years, or you could be in the early stage for 10. Yes, ma'am.
What percentage does alcohol cause?
Oh, alcohol induced. So I'm not sure of the percentage, but there is a huge chunk where it can be alcohol-induced dementia. So if you are a heavy drinker, and if you guys are familiar with Wendy Williams, she's been in the news lately because she's been recently diagnosed with frontotemporal. She was a heavy drinker. Hers was absolutely induced with alcohol.
What's a heavy drinker?
Right. All of that is, it's subjective, right? Based on the documentary I saw with Wendy, she was hiding bottles. So if you're hiding bottles. So if you're on that level, then please slow down. But if you're not, I think you're in good hands.
It's my impression that there's little, if any, medication that's available to treat or delay dementia. They're not very effective. And could you tell us, confirm whether that's true?
So,
And then would you also please comment on the research that's being done to provide medications and the potential for success?
sure. So with the medication question, I mentioned earlier there was 3, Lecanemab, donanemab, and algemam. Those are groundbreaking because it actually stops or slows, I shouldn't say stop, but it does slow the progression a ton. And this is groundbreaking because all the other medications that you probably are aware of, like Aricept and I always mispronounce the other one that starts with a D, yeah, I'm not gonna try it. Yes, thank you. Those treat symptoms of the disease. It's not actually attacking the biology of the brain like Lecanemab, donanemab, and algemam does. Again, those only are truly effective in a very small window that's in the very early stages of the disease where it might not even be classified or truly diagnosed as a early stage. It might be in that mild cognitive impairment stage where they're trying to figure out which form of dementia you do have. Your research question. When it comes to research, not my strong suit. What's going on right now is the blood test, right? That's like the new thing in the news. Don't have much information about it. It's trickling down. I'm not the first person that gets that information. That would be our research champion. And so I could connect you with her, who would have all the key points of that current study. Any other questions? You guys are great at asking questions. I love this. All right then. Well, if that's it, then thank you guys.
Well, thank you for coming.